What we're going to show today actually includes a number of updates to the inventory products page. So it includes the cost of goods. And then we also did a number of layout changes, some UX changes and stuff like that. So if you just give us a chance to kind of show everything and explain it, and then we'll be happy to take any questions or comments. I'm going to kind of just show and walk through all the different layout changes and updates, and then we go into the functionality of, say, cost of goods and all that other stuff. You'll probably notice just overall changes in the layout. We added some columns over here for the cost. So we've got the average cost and the total cost for the product and the variants. We also exposed the buy list price settings, which was requested by a couple clients and Dan. So we've exposed that. We also did some kind of color in the columns to make it easier to follow, and these dividing lines. So overall, the layout is easier to follow and understand kind of what you're looking at, and your eye can scan that and follow these guidelines. We also did a sticky header. So when you scroll down, this stuff stays with you so that it's easier to see like what you're looking at. And there's, as you know, currently in the admin, there's some links on the right that you can click. We moved those into a hoverable icon, so you can get to those links to go to the product on those different sales channels, which saves some space, as well as lets it be scalable, so we can add as many sales channels to that dropdown as we want, and it doesn't just keep taking up space and cluttering the interface. Then we also made
Thank you.
Then we also made some improvements to the buy list and optimum quantity, which will probably be something that we'll need to discuss. But basically, now a product level has an optimum quantity, and the variant level simply has a checkbox that allows you to determine that, yes, I want to buy this, or no, I don't want to buy this. And then the optimum quantity will be fulfilled with any combination of these, instead of setting an optimum quantity for each individual variant. That was a discussion with Julian, as well as some other discussions we had that kind of led us to that. So we can talk about that later. So yeah, those are the updates. So cost of goods, let me make sure I'm on the right prototype really quick. So one of the things that Julian mentioned is we originally had it where if you adjust the quantity in here, it would bring up the cost of goods stuff where you'd kind of fill it out and see that. But we went through a bunch of discussions, and one of the things that we came out with, like a takeaway, was that actually that should be in the add to inventory mode. So to do cost of goods, you just turn that on, and then you're in the add to inventory mode. And then I can click up, and this pop-up comes up where I can see the previous quantity, new quantity, the change in quantity, the average cost, and then the total cost for that quantity that I'm adding in. And then I could just click up again, and it updates this again. And then I could edit this if I want, and it'll average it out to the new average cost. So if I change this from $1.30 to $1.80, now I have a new average cost for the two things I'm adding. And then I just hit save, and then I would obviously keep going and do whatever I want with the rest of this. And then I'd go to the bottom or top and hit the Save Changes button. And one of the reasons we have it that it just pops up like this on click, hold on, turn this on, is because that way I can click multiple times right away, and I don't have to like get interrupted by something where I'm like, oh, I want to click multiple times or anything. It's just it flows, right? It's just very easy. I'm like, yes, I'm going to up that and then do this. And it just is like a flow, very easy. So that is the main cost of goods thing. Let me just double check if I have anything else that I kind of want to go over really quick here.
Hey, Matt, real quick, if I click save and add quantity, I'm not having to click save again on the page, right?
So like when I do this and then I save and add quantity, so what you do, the reason why we don't have it save the page is because you might have other edits that you've done, or you want to keep doing. So I might want to go to this next one and add a couple, go to this next one, add a couple, and then when I'm all done, I would hit the save button for the whole page.
From engineering standpoint, from engineers' standpoint, we would want the save to be ajaxed and not have to do a separate action later.
Okay.
Each time we could write that to the API
Sure.
and have that go right into the sync service.
That sounds good to me. As long as the page doesn't have to reload, that's fine. That would be great.
Ajax means, yeah, Ajax allows
Yep,
us to do that without paying.
perfect. Yeah, that sounds awesome. We'd be happy to have that be the way. That would be fantastic. Okay, so edit variant cost. Let's see. So I think this one was like, if I want to edit the cost here, I can change whatever I want, and then I click outside of that field, and then it updates the average cost based on what I just did. If I minus quantity, so this one I don't remember 100%. Mike and I, or like Mike might have to comment later. I don't want to go over it now, but basically, if I minus the cost, it just notifies me, hey, you didn't actually necessarily sell that item, like, so it may or may not be sold. But the point is, like, I just am adjusting down, and then it's like, you're new, we're adjusting your average cost. This is your previous average cost, previous quantity. You just put it to 3, so now your average cost is that. Because you technically, again, I don't remember the discussion. It's been a while since we talked about that, but we can go over that as well if needed. Let's see. Also, the privileges for cost, that we want to add a column. So I could just uncheck this for a user and then save it. And then I'm sure this stuff would probably stretch all the way over or whatever, but the point is, like, the cost isn't there. So you can control which employees or users have access to view that. And then there's a minor change to the infinite quantity, because currently, I don't recall what it looks like right now, but I believe currently the infinite quantity is like a checkbox or something. And we polled a number of our clients, and basically pretty much everyone said that they almost never use that, if at all. So because it's not a highly used item, we put it inside of a pop-up. So you can see, one or more variants have infinite quantity. And so if I open the pop-up for editing it, it's like a new thing within this editing the product pop-up. And then I can choose the variants that I want infinite quantity on, and then I just hit the save button. So that's within there. But this is a good indicator. As I'm looking at the page, I can just quickly see, like, oh, this item has an infinite quantity, but it's not taking up space. I think that's pretty much everything. So I don't know, Mike, if you have any comments, or if you think that I pretty much covered it. Do you have any thoughts? And then
From
after
a from a
Mike, what's that?
Oh, just gonna add that from an accounting standpoint, there's the way you handle inventory. There's FIFO and LIFO, which is first in, last out, and last in, first out. So that would affect, based on timestamp of inventory added, it'll affect your average cost of goods, just in terms of like the order in which you're choosing to acknowledge what items are actually selling.
So I actually do have a comment on that. We have considered that. There's a couple ways to approach that. It can either be done in the back end, right? Where basically we
And Mike,
decide.
I might reach out just to a couple CPAs that I know, and maybe we can ask some of our members to, maybe we can have a CPA conference call, and just find out maybe there's like one best way of doing it, just from their perspective. Like, really, this is a feature for not just the business owner, but for their accounting team and for their CPA. Like, whatever is going to help on a tax basis. Our real goal with cost of goods is to have you be able to track your costs and also use that to reduce your taxes. So our real goal here is that.
That makes sense. Like I said, there's two ways we can approach this. Done in the back end, right? So we know which one comes in at what price, and you can accordingly do that. Second part is that money is fungible. So if you have 4 cards and you pay anywhere between 10 and $1, right, then it does average out, and it doesn't matter which card you sell; they all become averaged out to the same cost. From an accounting business standpoint, yeah, it would make sense if you paid $10 for one, you paid $1 for one that you
Well,
lost.
I started out, but it's 6 months ago. It's 6 months ago, I was making 10, and slowly it been 8, and there was 6, it was 4, and now it's 2. It does matter because your cost basis inventory changes is if you're selling the newest one in first, or if you're selling the oldest one first. So that's how it does affect things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we've definitely taken consideration. I think on the other hand, it's the same. You like you can reverse that model, right? So tunes can go up in price and um
Yes. And that's
yeah,
where
so that's
the
where it's like
CPA
it's kind of
questions come in. Like, but you do have, if you choose one method, you do have to stick to that method. You don't get to flop back and forth, just so you know.
That sounds
yeah,
good.
I think we
And
can maybe consider
the
that
other,
as a setting, right? So if we do a settings within the accounts,
yeah,
we can choose
yeah,
which
exactly.
model.
It'll
Uh,
be a preference.
Okay,
Um,
so real
go
quick,
ahead.
so we can get some of that feedback from members on Thursday, but I agree, Dan, that would be great to get
Yep.
some input from some other people. But I will say, so I may or may not be understanding this correctly, but I will point something out just to make sure. So if I do this, the issue with this current UX is that I'm adding in a quantity with an average cost or whatever for these, but what you're saying is we need to track the individual cost for each individual item. So this would
That's
not
correct.
actually, this would
Yeah.
not work
Which
then,
then computes, it
right?
computes the average cost. You don't set your average cost. You're asking for how many did I just buy and what was my price that I paid, which would then compute the average cost. And then the average cost would change based on the FIFO or LIFO settings.
Yeah,
Right, but what I'm saying is like, if I want to add two in here that I paid different amounts for, then it doesn't know the first and first. It doesn't know what I'm putting in what order or whatever.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Right? If I just bought,
I
like, if
would
I have a
say
couple,
usually when you're,
yeah, go ahead.
mhm,
Go
totally
ahead.
makes sense. Yeah, no, you're right. Because and it's a real world scenario. Like somebody walks up to your table or someone walks up to your counter, and you may pay one person $15, and you might get someone else that you're paying $12, and that's real. That happens all the
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
Um, so that's definitely something that needs to be accounted for here.
I think what we
And I
could
would say
do,
that leads me into the next kind of business use case, which is I'm buying a small collection or a huge collection, which is, um, I might have a box or a binder of cards that I just bought for $500, let's say. And what I need is the ability to go into a mode where I know that my cost across all the items is 500, but for minimizing my taxes on carryover of inventory value, what I want to do is assign the $500 in cost to the items most likely, and this goes back to the inclusion of the new data layer of turn rate rank. Um, I want to assign as much of that cost basis to the items most likely to sell in terms of sales velocity. So I know that's a somewhat new user story to blend into this, but that's an important one.
it's yeah, it's not because I do remember you talking about that, and Mike and I discussed it. I mean, based on what you just said, my understanding would be, I mean, if you're gonna do that, wouldn't you just manually assign those values to the different things? I'm just confused how that would fit in
Well,
because
what
like,
you'd
go ahead.
really want to you'd really want to have a set of percentages, sort of like a table of percentages to say, like, I want to assign the $500 in value to the top 20% or top 25% of the items uh, in the batch of products that I just bought.
Interesting.
So we need a way
Yeah,
to,
that's interesting.
because members don't particularly care how the cost basis is applied in this way. What they would be wanting is to have save on labor cost, which is if we could just programmatically spread the cost across by percentages. Um, if the item is above a certain value, if it's a $50 item, maybe I could assign a $40 cost to it, and then when it sells, I've cleared that $40 cost off my books. And that's kind of the scenario that it's a more advanced way of looking at your inventory costs and tracking it, but it would be a game changer from a tax liability standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay,
we did
cool. Thanks for
discuss a
clarifying.
mass import feature actually that would be like that. I don't think it would necessarily be within this.
This is basically like,
same
hey,
area of the admin, but
I
they can
bought
do
a
like-
batch.
Yeah.
Like if it's like I bought a batch of items and I want a batch process, here's my cost, just a little calculator basically to give them the capability of setting the parameters of applying that cost. But like I want 100% of that $500 cost spread out at, 80%, 70%, 60% of the sell price. And I want all that $500 to be on the items that have the highest turn rate. Because the sooner I can get those that cost off my books, the better.
It's one of those weird things I think with we've been kind of struggling a little bit with this because people have so many different intents during different processes and journeys.
Well, that's what I'm saying is it just needs to be a calculator that lets them set their preferences. And then once they've set their preferences, every collection that they buy can use those preset preferences. So that would just be, I'm just throwing this user story in there because it's more advanced, but it's a very likely scenario. People buy things in batch and bulk all the time. It's the best possible way to buy inventory when you do it right. So anyway, just throwing that out there.
Automate it. So in a sense, like let's say you pay $500 for 100 cards. We know in our
you could say different ranges could apply a different cost basis. So for everything in that batch between $5 and $10, you could say, I want to set my cost to 70% of the sell price. So it has a higher, right.
Or I mean, like even alternatively, we could do even simpler, right? So if you take in, let's say your 100 cards at $500, and we have all the data basically know what the average sell price is, it could just automatically distribute the prices based on the scale of what the cost of each card is, right? So you don't end up with
that's not that misses the point.
Yeah, you're
that I know what you're saying.
He's accounting for that already. With I'm assuming that was what Dan was just saying. Was that
it's like
calculators built into that? So, for example,
just the next level where you can set.
If you purchase a collection of 100 cards for $500 or whatnot, you then import this batch of cards into your database to say, okay, here's how much I spent. Here are the cards that I purchased, but I don't have individual buy prices for every card. You then can tell the system, okay, I want you to go into order using the cards that sell the quickest. And here's the percentage I want you to take the sell percentage based on a range and make it 60, 70% of the sell price, make the buy price. And then you assign that value going in order of every card, depending on sales velocity, until you hit the $500. So for example, right. So for example, if there's 100 cards and if there's 100 cards and the first one, even if it's just a couple of cards, even if the first 3 of them, you buy for $33 a piece, that's it. It's going to assign that $33 buy value and then nothing below those because those are the 3 fastest selling cards. And I know that if I'm getting my value for those cards and they're leaving the book, they're leaving inventory quickest, I'm getting that off the books as fast as possible. And then assigning a 0 value to everything else is essentially a win for me. So it's what you were just saying about having it calculate everything in the buy order based on sales. Yeah, it's going to do that to the stuff that matters, but Dan is saying that it uses that calculation, but only for the stuff that you want it to use the calculation for, which is the highest velocity sales, which he's right. That is exactly how I would want to do it. If I made an offer to a guy and he said, I'll sell you my whole collection for $10,000, I'm not going to go through every single card and assign a price to it. I'm also not going to put it in the system as though all $10,000 went to all of those cards. I'm only going to assign it to the cards that I know I can get rid of the quickest until it hits that $10,000 buy price.
So question, let's see, and this is, I think, part of the fun of troubleshooting this.
That's actually a good, real quick, Mike, just I want to say something, because we may actually want something that's both value related and turn rate related, because, when you have a beta mock sapphire in that collection, its turn rate may be low. It may not have a fast turn rate. So, that's an interesting ring.
That was the second part of my question. The first part being, it's under the same model, let's say $400 for 100 cards, and you set them to be 75% of the cost. What would happen in this situation where you applied now $300 of cost, but now you have a leftover of $100 of cost that isn't applied to any of those cards because you set 70. Let's say all of them were 75%, just like Same card, right? 100 of the same exact card. You have it set to 75% of the cost, and basically you messed up. You paid more than you should have, right? So now the system reads this and goes, okay, well, I'm gonna apply this money down, but I have left over $100 because I can't apply that $100 based on the set
Yeah,
parameters.
the calculator would tell you that you have, in this case, $100 more to spread across the collection.
Okay. So so we would ask basically,
And then it needs to
hey, buddy,
needs to
sorry,
send an email.
I'll put this.
Needs to send an email to the owner of the company
And it needs
saying
to fire that employee that
this
made that buy.
buyer is not very good. This was a
Like,
bad
like,
collection.
in my experience, like working with coins, sometimes you don't get what you thought you got. I imagine with cards, it's a little more straightforward, but that's something that I think, as I've been kind of looking at these projects, I am trying to take in consideration, anything.
No, it should be collectibles agnostic. It doesn't matter. It should work for coins. It should work for
Exactly.
cards. It should work for anything. You used cars. It doesn't matter.
Totally. That's the approach we're kind of taking on it, right? So that's why this question I think is very valuable. Like maybe it's less likely that with Magic, with the way that the inventory works, it's a little more straightforward. I mean, maybe on the grading it could be wrong, right? But like with
Well, the
coins, you can just have a
percentages.
straight up wrong coin altogether.
What I can say though is that the percentages we're talking about with this calculator are probably always higher than what you are actually paying. So the odds are like it's basically the top of the range. Like if you were desperate, like it's reasonable, and all you need to do for accounting, GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices, you just need to have something that's reproducible, consistent, and reasonable. And so if you put 80% as your cost of goods on an item, listen, you have a 20% margin. There's a lot of industries that don't have a 20% margin. So it is, but if you were to actually take that item on a one-off basis, a collection of one, you might have paid 55% of its sell price or 40% of its sell price.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think like approaching this. So wait, sorry, another question. So if you were to buy 100 cards, right? Let's say you're at a convention and you paid $400. In our system, you would have to look up each card, right? Or the other alternative is to write it all out into an Excel spreadsheet and then do a mass upload. Those are like the two options, really. So,
well, what I'm saying is I want a user experience that lets me autocomplete and make a batch of items. I want to reduce the number of clicks and the number of pages that I need to look at. So this would be a single page application that's saying I'm buying a batch of items. And
this might be a double win for us since we just designed this new deck builder as well. And I think this
the deck builder will totally
actually function for.
Yeah, it totally will. It's the same thing. Like whatever a deck is a relative group of items, and there's nothing that says the deck couldn't be 1,112 cards. It could also be 60 cards. It could also be 5 cards. So that user experience for the deck builder is very, very good. And I highly recommend that we adopt it, even from a coded level. Like we could do complete code reuse.
Yeah, that makes sense. We could do a batch buy feature, something with an inventory, right? Where basically you click on that, go, hey, I got a batch, we need to add to inventory, and then it's the deck.
And then just like turn on the
comes up, and then you put in your cost for the whole batch, and then you put in your list, set your settings for that list.
Your settings for your cost of goods calculator, and then you're good.
Yeah,
and
the only
other thing that and I'll try to get some information from some CPAs is in terms of the reports, like let's say end of the week, end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year, like what do the reports ideally need to look like so that your CPA is like really happy? Like let's empower them to save our members as much money as possible. And CPAs are hundreds of dollars an hour. So like the more we can save their time, like it's infinitely worth our time to save them time.
As far as asking a CPA, actually the person I live with, my girlfriend is an accountant, and my best friend is a CPA as well. So I could easily Zoom and We can
Fair
talk
enough.
about this sort of stuff.
Yeah, we'll have when we get this really like tightened down, we can have our members all like, hey, bring your CPA onto the call, if they want to, and we can invite some CPAs onto the call and just explain our, the industry, and maybe we can get some more cool ideas to, save money.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense.
to comment on the first in, first out. So, I mean, it seems like based on this UX, you would have to add the one item and the one cost and then save it. And then you'd have to click like open in this pop-up again and add your other one at the other cost. And then it knows the order and the individual.
No, I would definitely Ajax that. So you wouldn't need to save it. You're just putting in the quantity and at what price, and you could definitely add another or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
right beneath new quantity, just
Right.
to add a new row basically.
Yeah.
I would do
think the
that.
scenarios-
we
wait,
talked
hold
about
up here. Hold up. I think we're getting a little off track here. So that scenario seems highly unlikely. If you were to buy 6 cards, let's say, from somebody for $60 right then and there, you just paid $60 for 6 cards.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, like, you can go to a show and you could come back with a 5K box and you might have purchased, 50 of some popular card, and you knew that at the beginning of the show you were paying $8 and then you couldn't buy enough of them because the thing was becoming more popular, and now you're paying 10. And then by the end of the show, the thing wasn't $8 anymore, selling it for 12. It's like, no, I'm paying 12 and I'm selling it for 20 now. That's what happens at these shows.
Wouldn't you be adding these live right here in our system? Like,
yeah, but you can't. You just can't. You just can't.
Okay.
Yeah, the fervor, like the amount of activity happening at a booth, let alone a game store like shop, retail counter. There's too much going on. You basically, I'm open-minded.
Are they pen and
Yeah,
paper?
I mean, yeah, I'll listen. Julian, Adam, do you guys want to weigh in on like what you think in terms, because most of the time it's just memory. Like, what do you guys think would the best, like when stuff that's changing quickly and you're buying lots of stuff, but the prices are changing as you're buying? Because like if you're buying, let's say you start out and you're buying it for $10 and it's easy to buy, you're immediately paying $8, right? Like you're no longer paying 10 because 10 is too easy, meaning the project, the item is now easier to buy than you thought it was. So you're not paying 10 anymore. You're offering 8, and then you're offering 7, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Adam go into more detail because he does more shows than I do by far. But in our case, yeah, like there's been plenty of times where we've gone to shows. We're purchasing a card for a certain value at the beginning of the show. It's a popular card. We're turning them over quick. The price goes up. We buy it for more. We buy it for more even later. By the end of the show, it could be twice as much. I mean, it just changes. There's absolutely no possible way that by the end of that show, I'm going to be able to tell you the exact number I bought and the exact price I bought for all of those. We're not writing it. Like, we do keep track of every transaction we make. So somebody comes over us and sells us a bunch of those cards plus other stuff for $100. We write it down. Okay, so-and-so buy order this much money, and then the next guy and the next guy. So at the end of the show, we'll know how much we spent. We'll know how much we spent for each transaction. We will definitely really not know how much we spent for each individual copy of a specific card.
Yeah,
it's kind of like when we get back to the store, depending on how much we purchased and how much time we had at the show. We had a lot of time at the show when we were able to organize everything and get it to a spot where we can enter it quickly when we get back. Great, we'll do it that way. Otherwise, that stuff's just getting thrown into a Roka and getting sorted and let us know what we got and then uploading that. So yeah, there's almost no chance that we would be able to access this, adjust prices, enter quantities or anything, or even have that information after the show to put in. But
would that feature be beneficial then to do it individually, or would it be better just to say,
no, I agree with Dan though.
$200 for 20 of these.
The feature in there, the ability.
We need like a starting cash, ending cash.
Yeah,
like, do we need to basically process an entire show?
I don't.
We're like, hey, we started with 10,000 in cash, we ended with 4,000 in cash, and we had $5,500 in sales.
I mean, Adam, do you access Crystal Commerce outside of like checking prices occasionally at all for inventory management at a show?
At a show, no.
Yeah, me neither. So like Crystal Commerce doesn't even come into play at a show. It's just too hectic. It's too busy. It's too
I don't
quick.
have time.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Like that, this cost basis is great for like things that are going through the buy list or things that we're entering in that got bought in the store maybe. But yeah, there's no chance. I mean, like, yeah, it would be spectacular, but I would buy a tenth of what I could normally buy because I'd be sitting there trying to like inventory my price for every item. Like that's just not feasible.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. That's just, it's not the way that it works, unfortunately.
So-
And this is something I
so
brought up
even
before
later-
with regards to the way the cost works is that, like Adam just said, the cost is really great for things that you're doing through like the proper channels, the things that people are submitting buy list to you and mailing it in. People are coming in store. So you're using the POS side of the software to do buy orders and whatnot. Anytime I'm doing manual changes, like the screen right here that you have up, I almost never want that to affect the cost of something because I'm usually just making edits or something. Now, I understand they made it so that it's the add to inventory button. And yeah, I guess that kind of works, but very rarely do we use that method to actually add the inventory. It happens on occasion, but our goal to save on labor is to do things in massive quantities. We want to be able to do Roka uploads. We want to be able to do collections from spreadsheets and just mass import all that stuff. That's where the cost is coming from. The cost is coming from those proper channel inventory acquisitions through buy lists, through the POS buy system in store, stuff like that. I almost
So we could take a Roka import, which by the way, there's a new feature that just rolled out, which is you can export Roka to a Crystal Commerce ID, and you can import the Crystal Commerce ID through Mass Create now.
Oh, that's kind of interesting.
So yeah, Roka added a feature that lets you export with the Crystal Commerce ID as the identifier, so you don't have to have the exact name match anymore.
Oh, that active? Is that live?
Yeah, that was live last week.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's pretty nice.
And then, but what if we took a batch upload of like that, like a CSV upload of like a Roka export, and then we were able to move that into the that cost of goods calculator.
That's where all of the cost, like that plus in-store buys, is where all of the cost of goods should be. And I'm just going to go one step further with this. Is something I brought up last time. Is that in my head, the way I do things, I think there's two separate numbers here that I like to know. The first number is historical buy data. I want to know how much I paid on average for any given card. And like you said before, it's going to depend on which ones come in first, at what price and whatnot. But cost of goods is and cost of the actual like item to sell is something different to me, because that number should be calculating the fees that I'm doing on a website. Like a friend of mine, Ryan, who works for 95 MTG, they have their own software, and one of the things their software does is on the fly it will calculate any of the fees associated with the different services, if it's connected to TCG Player, if it's connected to eBay, whatnot. So the system will tell me, okay, here's the historical buy data for this card, here's how much you paid for it, plus here's how much you're going to be paying in fees at the current sell price, so that's going to be added to the cost, plus here's how much it's going to cost on average to ship this card, calculating the cost of the envelope, the stamp, the labor, all that stuff. I want to know how much it's going to cost me to actually sell and ship this card, because the historical buy data is one thing, but if I bought the card for an average of $5, but if after you figure out the fees, the labor, the equipment and stuff like that, if it really cost me $7.50 or $8, that $10 sell price might not actually be accurate. I'm gonna have to bump it up because of all this other stuff. So historical buy price and cost of goods and cost of transaction ever are two different things to me, and both of them are valuable.
I actually have some comments on this because this was a very big discussion for Matthew and I after we got off the horn with you last time. So one of the biggest issues that we have with that, and we have considered some ideas for accommodating this actually in a separate section, but for instance, someone here in Seattle running a store in downtown versus someone running a store in La Conner, Washington, or Conway, the rent is significantly different, right? So those costs attributed to those cars are also significant.
Yeah, we could handle that
But that
on like
doesn't mean-
on a preference
sorry.
basis.
That's exactly what I suggested. I said there should be a preference page where you can enter in, here's my rent, here's my costs, and then that's broken
Yeah.
down.
Here, you have fixed costs and variable costs.
Exactly.
Yes,
So-
yeah. So
But
that's
I
where
want to have the ability to put that in so I could see it broken down on a card by card basis. Exactly what
I completely agree.
Yeah.
This is like
So-
this is like business analytics, like where you're like,
that's what we're
tell
talking
me
about
what
cost of
my
goods.
actual break even is, like what velocity at what profit margin.
Exactly. That's the valuable data. This is like okay and all, but honestly,
That's where we're headed.
Yeah.
That's where we're headed with all of this, Julian, just so you know, is we're heading to like full business, like profit optimization.
That's great. And I want to be clear, the changes that are made so far based on what we talked about last time when I saw are fantastic. Like I love the fact that you're setting a want to buy and the total quantity, because we've talked about this before, how setting optimal quantity per condition is just not the way not the way the game works. Like you will never do it that way. You're never asking for 10 of a near mint and 8 of an SP. You're asking for, I want 50 of this card in stock. Just give me 50 of them. I don't care if they're near mint.
Yeah, I'm gonna pay you less for the things that are not near mint, but
sure.
I just want 50.
The example I gave was like, okay, if I have it set so that I want 20 of each condition in the current system, and somebody sells me 100 near mints, I no longer want 20 SPs or 20 MPs or whatnot. But the system is going to keep saying I do. So this way.
No, I agree. This
better.
is definitely a good improvement, guys.
sorry, I wanted to finish my comment based on the discussion, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
The consideration we had again is the difference between, like, say, the Seattle store and, let's say, the small town store, right? Your variable costs are going to be considerably different. And part of this feature actually will roll into the pricing tool. So we know that, a card that sells for $10 in the market is going to sell at $10 at the market, whether you're in Seattle or if you're in La Conner. Right. So that's the advantage of being a small store in La Conner, is you might get a better profit range and the situation because of your variables, right? But you're going to have a smaller, clientele in your in-store feature, right? So doing it as a side preference thing, that helps. But from our end, like we want to collect the data, it seems, for the buy aspect, the same way that we know what the market buy and the market sell is, because then we can create automation tools for the pricing tool, so you can actually be purchasing based on percentages of what's popular and changing when the pricing tool rolls out. So for us to say, oh, the card is 70 cents, that's what everyone's paying for it, because on the market it's $1. That being the cost of the card itself allows us for the automation process of the pricing tool to be like, hey, people are paying 70 cents for this. It's really popular. Do you want to pay 70 cents, or do you want to pay like 75 cents to be more competitive or whatnot? The pricing tool will allow you to set those settings. But if your cost is, 85 cents, and let's say Adam's cost is 15 cents because his rent's $20 a month or whatever in the middle of nowhere, or he doesn't even have rent, maybe he runs out, like, see how those variable costs can change so drastically that it sort of grabs the data and just.
Well, those are not variable costs. Just in this scenario, variable cost, those are fixed costs. Like rent is a fixed cost.
Yeah,
I know that it does vary by each of our members has a different fixed cost.
Yeah, that's what I meant by
but think of it,
it's a varying fixed cost between members, right?
Yeah, like a fixed cost or a variable cost would be like the percentage, on different sales channels.
Totally.
But I guess what ultimately, I think if I were to pull back and say what's going to be helpful from what we should design, is imagine that I can put in, it's like a P&L generator, like a sample P&L. Like I get to put in what expenses I have, and I get to fill in buckets for the different expenses that are roughly what I pay. And then imagine I could like replay the last month, and even, to the point of like having future, certainly with the whole idea with turn rate rank is that I can show you that like 80% of your inventory is in the bottom, 50% turn rate. And you're like, wow, I have a lot of stuff that doesn't sell quickly. I need to get less of that, and I need to get more of this top 20% turn rate items. And, I might also need to add on to these new sales channels that are adding that have a lower incremental or lower marginal cost per sale, like, because the average sale percentage is 5%, not 15%. And so I want to make sure I'm on all those channels. But it's basically like a business optimizer is the best way to think about it, is that the pricing plays into it, the cost of goods plays into it, the data analytics side of the system starts to play into it. But you're basically saying, how do I optimize my inventory buys, the sales channels I'm on, my cost of fulfillment? It's like, oh, somebody figured out how to buy shipping labels or bubble mailers for like half the price, right? Each of those things starts to add up on a variable like number of sales transacted basis. Like my cost to ship, like you said, it's postage, it's labels, it's how quickly do we able to pull inventory, like my employee time, if I can break that out. So I just kind of think that maybe it's certainly a separate project than cost of goods, even though it includes it, but it's kind of like a business optimizer,
Right.
a P&L optimizer.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's what Mike and I talked about, it being a separate like preference area where you can set all that stuff. And the thing is though, like Mike was saying, I mean, we don't want the individual members' costs or like expenses or whatever stuff to be like affecting our data for the actual cost that they're paying for the product. So that would be kind of a separate area, or it would like display it in a certain way, but our stuff still tracks just the cost of the product, right?
I have
For
another
our
question
data.
within that, because I mean, you do
Go
have
ahead.
fixed costs like your rent, right? And envelopes and yada yada. But let's say if you only have 1,000 cards in inventory, then your fixed costs would be spread across that, right? So I would say that if you got $1,000 rent, then that for 1,000 cards, that means that each card's $1 extra cost, and you have to sell
Right. Well, it's
1,000
telling
cards
you,
to make
right,
that,
it's
right?
telling you that at your current velocity of sales, that you're expected to lose $3,000 this month.
Exactly. So I think that's where
Here's what we
it
need,
becomes more
here's some
powerful.
things you can do about that, right?
Yeah, because I think that metric makes more sense, right? Based on how you're performing, this is a real like what you need to do to cover those costs versus, oh, the cost. I think that's where I was getting at. It's like the cost isn't going to for your card isn't necessarily $1 versus 70 cents because you have rent to pay, because you may not sell 1,000 cards to cover your. I mean, this is this is obviously not necessarily you guys. It could be like a small guy, right? No, so
Well,
it's
it's like maybe think of it this way, like maybe it's like number of days to break even as like a metric, like based on your run rate. Is it 15 days? The first 15 days of sales, does that cover your costs? Right. I mean, just thinking like if you put in the certain values into this business, P&L calculator or P&L optimizer, like is it I'm only profiting the last 2 days of sales in the month? Is that when I've covered all my costs, and the last 2 days now I'm in the black? So it's at whatever the marginal percentage is of profit per item, or average profit per SKU.
Yeah, I think like kind of approaching it from that sense makes it makes it a little easier of a consumable data, right? Because after a certain point for the time of the month, that cost is no longer affected on your card or isn't reflecting on your. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's like
outside
how
of like
much,
the shipping cost, right?
well,
'Cause
that's where it goes into the sort of marginal expenses per sale, because that affects your marginal profit per transaction and the number of transactions that you can process. If you can add more channels that have better unit economics, then you're like, well, I went from it taking 16 days to cover my fixed costs to only 14 days to cover my fixed costs, and you're like, that's amazing. Like I need to keep, so I want that high level, like I want to manage my business from 40,000 feet, inputs and outputs, and I want to optimize. I want to be able to say, hey, I can charge based on the turn rate rank. I know this shit is going to sell. So do I want to put the stuff that's in the highest turn rate? Do I want that on TCG Player? Do I want that on Amazon? Or do I want to sell it to my direct customers at 2.5% instead of 12.5 or 20% fees, right? If it's going to sell no matter what, do I want it on sales channels, or do I want to offer that to my loyal direct customers first, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I think our next step then is probably look into this, the combination of the mass import feature, right? That kind of, Julian's after here, that kind of maybe incorporates this deck builder feature that we've been working on. So you can just put in your 500 bucks or whatever, set your percentages, and then, you know, whatever error states come if you're under or over. And then the second part would be to create a preference section where you can put in your fixed costs. So lights, power, or whatever. I mean, even like, I guess if you know on average what those bills are, then it's fine. I don't imagine you're using less electricity one month than the next month, right? So if you can put all that in, then we can create a metric within the insights project that allows you to kind of see kind of how you're tallying up against your overall cost of running business versus profitability and such. And I think that would actually be, would that seem like a reasonable compromise, Julian? Does that kind of get towards what you're after, where you'd be like, okay, now I can, if you can see a number, be like, hey, you know, so far at 0 cards sold this month, $0 in, you know, at each one of your cards with a 1,000 cards that you have in stock, it costs an extra $2 to make. Like if you have to sell 1,000 of these to make rent, right? But as you sell stuff, that number changes, right? So eventually, at the point where it's like, cool, your fixed costs are covered, so your card price cost is actually, you know, the real cost that you paid for that card. The variable costs, you know, like that's hard to calculate. It's like you don't have to buy an envelope, right, or ship it, pay for shipping if it hasn't sold, and that's for one card, right? If you sell 10 cards to the same guy, then that shipping envelope is the same price, right? You don't have to buy 10 envelopes; it's one envelope in that case. So I think that's where it gets a little somewhat messy. It seems like.
No, it wouldn't be messy because you'd be looking at like the last month's transactions,
Yeah,
and
so
you'd be
meaning
spreading the
everything.
actual costs, because you would ask for inputs like, hey, like last month, you know, how much did you spend on shipping supplies? You know, we have to basically get down to, you know, what are the costs involved in shipping an order, and then what percentage of my sales is coming from these different channels. So it's like, hey, it looks like 85% of my sales come from TCG Player, and that's also where I have the highest cost per transaction, and only 5% of my sales come from direct. So I mean, obviously it's passive versus active marketing. Like TCG Player is doing the marketing for you, whereas your own business, you need to figure out ways to get people to buy directly, you know, et cetera. But it would at least help on an initiative basis, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of profit we would be making, obviously, if people bought more directly. How can, you know, what might I do to get my customers to be more aware that buying directly is, you know, a benefit to the store, a benefit to them somehow. And there's certainly ways we can help with that over time. But it's sort of like you want to be able to change the variables a little bit and kind of like do a simulated month, right? Like you can take the historic data and then forecast it with adjusting certain variables, like play out the scenario of if I have a 5% increase in my direct sales, you know, what does my forecasted P&L look like, right?
That makes sense.
I think that's kind of the idea, is like give them like a sandbox to play with different variables to help them make different business decisions. You know, I don't know. That's kind of what comes to my mind.
Cool. Jumping back for 2 seconds to the other thing of adding different products at different costs within here. So Mike and I will play around with the idea of allowing to add like more rows, or we'll play around with that. Something else I forgot to mention is that we would have keyboard, you know, keys could do certain things in here, so you don't have to click. Like you could just click up on here and then hit enter on the keyboard, and it would just save and add quantity right then. Or you can hit escape and it'll get you out of here and stuff like that. So we can make it more efficient too, so you don't have to like click on each thing or do everything manually. So
Yeah.
yeah. So okay, cool. Well, yeah, it sounds
On
like
that point,
Go
on
ahead.
that point, Matt,
Yeah.
we'll have a meeting, I think next week, but there's some image recognition stuff that's becoming available.
Mhm.
So there's some ways that we could have members point a camera at products and have the product show up or populate like what's in a batch of items they want to buy or sell.
Yeah, totally. So actually it's funny because we talked a long time ago, I don't know how long, but a really long time ago about the idea of the like taking a picture to add a product. And I know you did leave a voicemail like 2 weeks ago about that I forgot to mention. But yeah, I actually designed a mobile version of like taking a picture and adding a product. It's
Cool.
funny, I already designed that like a long time ago, so it'd be worth looking at sometime soon to just sort of see where that design I did stands right now with what we want. I think there would be some useful aspects of it. To
Okay,
look.
great.
So yeah, cool.
Yeah, we can bring that up for next week when I think they're ready to do some integration against our APIs.
That sounds great. I will. Yeah. Just let me know and when that is, and I'll pull up the design that I have. I mean, we could even look at it later this week, just like ahead of time for you to see what I did or whatever. So cool.
Definitely. And then Terracrux, you want to give some feedback?
Oh yeah, actually, I was really interested to see if you've got any of the P&L margin stuff for anything other than Magic Singles. So let's say I wanted to pull a report on my board games. On average, I'm looking for 45% profit margin. Currently, I can't pull from the system what I've spent on board games in a period of time. So I have to run all those numbers manually in spreadsheets. Same goes with miniature games, stuff like that. So if I could extract the data from your system, it would literally help me train buyers up in my store, as well as eliminate a significant amount of hours. So basically, the P&L or margin dollars on any other category, I was really hoping we could see something on that.
Oh yeah, we're using Magic as just a placeholder. This is for every product line.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
if
we just
we were
happen to be
looking,
that we're using Magic. It could literally be anything from coins to board games to shoes. Like we're designing an agnostic way sense of collectible items, right? And how this works. Like,
got you. So if I wanted to look at, let's say, what I've spent and what I've made on board games in the last 30 days, how would I pull that? And I know I can get what I've made on them. That data is easy to drive.
Yeah.
What about
Well, that's perfect, because that's really what I was referring to earlier about the reports layer of the cost of goods, which is that guys, they want to be able to look at their, like you just said, an entire category and like, did 80% of my revenue come from these 20% products? And then what's my stock level? It's like, oh, well, those items, I'm sold out of half the items that generated 80% of my revenue. Oh shit, I need to get these back in stock. Otherwise my revenue per category is going to drop considerably. And that's the visibility that we're aiming at for the high level, so you could see across your different product lines and see where the revenue is coming from, and also see based on turn rate rank that maybe your revenue has dropped off the cliff because 90% of your inventory is in the bottom 50% turn rate. And it's like, oh, well, it's not that board games are bad. It's just that I don't have the ones in stock right now that everyone is after. And I need to, I might need to fire sale some of these board games I've got, free up some cash, and then make sure I can track down, the 10 or 20 titles that everybody is getting good sales velocity from right now. So I think what he's saying is, and again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. You're doing great, and you should probably just keep going. You had some good ideas. Is like, hey, I want to see. I click on board games. What data can I see that would help me better understand that category historically and on a forward-looking basis? What do I need to do?
Yeah,
like
as
my
an
margins
example,
might be good, but
yeah. As an example, if let's say I'm looking at role-playing games, and let's say my profit margin is 45%. I need to be able to pull the data, because currently what I do is we buy everything in the system And then I have to manually track everything that we've spent in spreadsheets. So what it does is if I know that I'm at 45% profit margin and that starts to dip to 35 or 30%, well, that means I'm bringing in too much inventory. But if it starts going upwards, let's say 55, 60%, that means I'm not bringing in enough inventory.
Or you're
and I'm
not
losing.
bringing in the right inventory, right? You might have brought in things that have a low turn rate rank, right? So it's just not popular. People don't want it.
Correct. But I mean, that's something that we've been tracking for years. And that's something any small retail store should be tracking. I mean, yes, getting that data would be amazing, but just getting what we're spending in the category right now would be miles ahead of what I'm currently getting out of the system.
So that would be the insights project that we're working on. So that would give you the information. I could showcase that for a big second.
Yeah, that would be so amazing. I mean, even if currently the process is we look at what we've made on board games and then we fill out a budget for it. This is what we're allowed to spend. And then we get granular on what went well, what are we out of, what are the turn rates. I mean, you guys have great reports that I can see, games that I've sold more than 3 copies of in the last week or 10 copies of in the last month. There's a lot of great reports in your system. Just extracting what we've spent in a category would be amazing. And that would be amazing as well for singles, being able to pull a report on every penny that I spent on singles in the last 30 days.
Yeah, Matthew, can you let me take over and I can kind of show that?
The other thing this ties into is the vendor management, where we have the distributor integration that lets them do recommended restock orders, like pushing you optional purchase orders that you can choose certain parts of you want or don't want. But the ability to create a purchase order of the items that you do need, and then finding the right vendor, the right supplier that does have those items to automate the fulfillment side of distributor restocking.
That's really awesome.
In short, this is a project that we're also working on right now with an engineer where we're gathering data to kind of start visualizing. But this is basically, in a nutshell, where you would find a lot of this information, right? What categories are performing. You can dive in deeper into categories to see the differences of what's performing well, what your costs are. Eventually, we want to actually do it so it's not just your store, but it's actually the whole network, so you can see how the network's doing. So if you're like, hey, this card's performing really well across all of our stores, do you maybe want to buy more of them or not? It kind of gives you a little more insight into the options that you have. So we have my data, which is how your store is performing and all the information based on what you're doing, right? Month per month, day per day. That's the stuff that we're kind of discussing right now. The different channels, categories, you can kind of change this and model it to whatever information you want it to visualize. And then we have the network data, which will look the same, but it will just actually show what the network's doing. Like if board games are up, for the month, or if Magic's doing really well, or Pokemon's doing well, or whatever, you can kind of dive in deeper and kind of make informed decisions from that information. So we want to surface that information to you and run reports from it as well too. So this is definitely part of a bigger project. We're already exploring options, everything from your overviews to your trending, best-selling, geographic stuff. I think that's something that we think is very interesting. Is Magic performing really well in New York City, versus Seattle, right? And maybe you want to pursue target advertising that way. If you're like, okay, clearly there's a bigger market for this product here, and I've been focusing my Facebook marketing to 100 miles of my store, maybe rather than focusing it 100 miles from my stores, I will focus on selling more online. So I'll just go ahead and run Facebook advertisements in that zip code instead, right? Because you have an advantage in that situation. If you're in let's say a small town.
No, I think that's fantastic.
Something in New York, you're going to have a better chance of selling to someone in New York at a better price than someone in New York, right? So these tools will kind of help you kind of hedge your business choices and how you market and such. So yeah, this sounds like more like what you were asking for. And this is one of the projects we're working concurrently with So like all of these things are kind of tied together. Like this one, the pricing tool, which is the automated stuff, the cost of goods factors into it because we want that data as well, so we can help with the buy list aspect. Because we want to create automated actions as well there. So they're all kind of tied together. Now it sounds like this deck list, this deck builder thing is, which we could do a little bit of, I think, real quick.
No, I mean, all of that obviously is very, very awesome. And I'm super jazzed up about getting all that kind of, I love data and I love the information. Do you know where in the project it is where I could pull information on how much I spent on role-playing games or how much I spent on Warhammer 40K in the last 30 days?
So that would actually be in the reporting area. That stuff will
Yeah.
be, yeah.
And-
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Do you know when that's going to start becoming available?
I do not. That is definitely on the roadmap for new design and stuff that we need to do.
You have an engineer
Yeah.
on it, but Daniel is working on doing the data core stuff.
Not me. Not me. There's a
Not-
different
not-
guy named
Yeah,
Daniel.
I
different
understand. Yeah.
Right now we
But
have
this
a
goes,
collection of Daniels and Dans at the company.
yes. Yeah, Daniel's a world-class data scientist and developer. He just helped us create the synchronization service, which is what streams data around the system into different channels. So like Manapool, for example, is the new marketplace that we recently added, and they now have like a sub 5-second synchronization. And all of the data insights service that you just saw is powered by the same engine. And then he is working right now on restoring full access to the log data. And the log data, historical logs, the data schema for that is more sophisticated than it used to be. So showing the product logs and activity logs for employees is the very, very, very basics of what it does. In the more advanced schema, it is the data store for everything you're seeing here, at least as part of it is. So where that project is at the data design layer. So the data is flowing, it is being stored, and we have production level databases built, and they're being populated for the logging, which will turn on. And by the end of the month, all the logging stuff will be restored, and it will serve as the backbone of data that lets us provide everything you were just looking at. So once the data is there and it's in a good format, then we're just going to need to build out the web application side. And that's what Matt and Mike have done a good job of creating taking all the user stories and interpreting them into a graphical user interface. And then it's just for front end engineers to take it on as the final step to do the front end design, hook into the data APIs for each module, and then we get to release it to beta and get feedback from everybody, and then it'll be live for everyone. So it's a this year thing. It's a late summer, we're hoping. So we'll see what happens.
That's crazy exciting. This looks incredible.
So this right here that I'm showing is actually the new deck builder feature we're working on as well. So this is what we're discussing as being able to use for the mass import feature for the cost of goods. So file upload and then pulls on your deck list. And then instead of having filters, we can swap it out for settings, right? And then we could add a thing that's like, add your or cost or something like that. So I mean, so we could definitely retrofit this with keeping a lot of the functionality for the mass upload cost feature for like when you come from a show or whatnot, and you've got your 500 cards. So ideally you should be able to use the system regularly too, right? So if you just add a column in Excel for cost and you add cost there and you do a mass upload, it should technically put that in as well, just like anything else once the system is actually updated. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at different options. I think the one that we showed earlier is more suited for like small time. Oh, I have a card I bought from some kid or whatever, and I'm just gonna add one more card to the system or two more cards or whatnot. Not big buys, but like occasional trades and stuff like that. So it's really quick and easy and dirty. Go in, hit that mode, put in what you got to put in, and move on. Right? Obviously, not very suitable for the big stuff. You guys get to preview our crazy working environment here when we're building stuff out. So yeah, I think that's realistically not suited for what Julian wants, but could be suited for someone who's selling as a hobby or something like that, where they bought a pack, right? And they're like, oh, I'm gonna sell a couple things out of this pack, and I'm just gonna add it to my inventory page.